I was cancelled by the mainstream media. I remain cancelled by the mainstream media. To me, that's great now.
No spin, no bias, no censorship.
In that journey, are you saying a lot of the news wasn't properly reported?
We're not being told the whole truth.
Is it that bad, though?
No, I think it's actually worse.
Oh.
I have been mugged twice in Sadiq Khan's London. Slippery Starmer currently has unbridled power. He is more unpopular than any Prime Minister in history ever.
What you think about Gary Neville saying that the problem is middle-aged white men?
It's also his fault.
Sorry, Gary!
I'm a free speech absolutist. We've got to have these conversations.
But you're not scared?
That's not democracy.
And what do you think of Tommy Robinson?
Well, I mean...
What do you really think about the digital ID?
is the start of a social credit system.
In your 20 years of journalism, what's been the most shocking thing you've discovered?
The most shocking thing that I discovered was that...
What's the current state of the UK right now?
Oh my God, we're screwed.
Oh,
We're absolutely screwed. Yeah, unfortunately, yes. Is there hope? Of course, you've always got to have hope. But the UK is in deep, deep, deep trouble. More trouble, I think, than we've been in since World War II. And there is the likelihood of a holy war. There is the possibility of a civil war. There is certainly so much going on in this country that I almost feel like the eyes of the world, the eyes of the West need to be on the United Kingdom, or the disunited kingdom, as I call it.
wow. Like, is it that bad, though? Or have we just got ourselves in a doom loop?
No, I think it's actually worse than what people realize, because remember, the deep state regime media don't often report the truth about how bad things are. It is in their interest not to, which is why we saw things like the Pakistani Muslim rape gang cover up go on for decades, because there was no desire actually to paint a picture of quite how bad things are. And what we now have is sectarian politics starting to dominate. We have an elite class not prepared to call out the threat of Islam for what it is. We have takeovers going on of our cities, our biggest cities, where there are no-go zones, whether you're talking about London or Birmingham, or even now parts of Glasgow in Scotland. So, no, I think we're in deep trouble. And by me saying that, it doesn't mean that I'm not patriotic. It doesn't mean that I don't love England, that I don't love the United Kingdom, that I don't love Great Britain, that I don't want to save it. But I actually think one of the biggest issues that we've had over the past 2 decades is people not talking about what's happening. I mean, there has been an invasion of our country, both legally and illegally, since 1997. Well, we haven't spoken about it. And look at where we're at now.
Wow. So you were in mainstream media, weren't you? You worked your way all the way up, and then you got cancelled by mainstream media. So in that journey, are you saying a lot of the news wasn't properly reported?
Absolutely, I was. Absolutely. Now, that's not to say that I didn't personally make strident attempts, and that there are not some odd examples of people who make strident attempts to report the truth. But it is incredibly difficult to report the truth in the mainstream media. However, that became almost impossible nearer the end of my time in the mainstream media. So even though, yes, you are completely right, I was cancelled by the mainstream media, I remain cancelled by the mainstream media. To me, that's great now. And certainly my viewers sense that I am finally unleashed, that I'm not concerned about having some billionaire telling me, oh, just go easy on this person. Oh, my wife's got dinner with this person in a few weeks' time, so maybe
that stuff
we should
really
talk about-"
happens?
Yeah, absolutely it happens.
So you're told what to quieten down on.
Absolutely you are.
And is that why you now have a show called Outspoken?
Yeah, it is. And it's why I'm owned by no one. And it's
Yeah.
been an absolutely fundamental part of what I do. I'm not one of these people who've gone independent and then immediately am trying to sell out to a network or trying to get big money from investors like Piers Morgan, for example. It's like, no.
Because did he go independent, but then is he still funded by Rupert Murdoch?
Well, he's still got a business relationship with Rupert Murdoch, but he's also now sold his show to Channel 5 in the UK, and he's also sold a portion of his show to a major investor.
So he's now not independent.
Well, I don't think that makes you independent. I think that makes you owned.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's loads of examples of it, aren't there? I mean, look at Candace Owens in the US. Certainly, since she's been independent, whether you like what she's saying or not, she is far more outspoken than she was as part of the Daily Wire organization when she had to deal with certain parameters. That's not to say the Daily Wire isn't a great organization. I actually think it is. I tend to love its content, but those presenters are working within wider ramifications. Likewise with me at GB News.
Okay, so we'll come back to media. But now I want to carry on this UK discussion because I talk about it a lot. And I get lots of hate for it being called a doom monger. Why don't you fuck off to Dubai then? Well, if they put the taxes up even more, I might.
You're tempted.
Yeah. But I was born here. I think Britain fundamentally is a great nation. It's sad to see what's happening. And I have to check myself every now and again and go, I'm not just being a doom monger, am I? Because that's what the algorithms love, and that's why I want to have this conversation. But, everywhere I look, things seem to be getting worse. But I'm also getting dozens, if not hundreds of messages a day from people saying, good on you for speaking out, you're doing good work. So maybe you could focus on, what do you think the 3 biggest problems in the UK are? And then at the end, we'll talk about some solutions. But now, what's the 3 worst things?
Well, look, firstly, in answer to your question, are we being doom mongers? Absolutely not. I am seeing this. I am living this every single day. I now live in a failed city. And if you go back and look at my former interviews, I mean, I've been in the public eye now for well over 2 decades. I used to say that London was the greatest city on earth. That wasn't just some type of throwaway line. I moved to London when I was 21 years old. I made it my home. I adored it. I loved it. I was passionate about it. And I genuinely felt lucky for living in the greatest city in the world. What I have seen over the past decade under the Muslim mayor of London, I do think that's relevant, by the way, and I'll come back to that, Sadiq Khan, we have seen a city which has been brought to its knees. He has quite literally destroyed the world's greatest city. I will talk about that. And by the way, I live it. I have been mugged twice in Sadiq Khan's London. I have been the victim of an attempted mugging once by 2 hooded men on a motorbike. In some cases, Rob, I didn't give them what they wanted. Maybe I should have, because in some cases, you know what? Those people are stabbed to death. I have also seen terror come into our lives. I was here on the tube on 7/7/2005. So and I moved to London at the end of 2004. So we know that terror is a threat, but the difference is now we are terrorized on a daily basis. You can't pull your phone out in the middle of a street in London. You can't leave your bike outside of your house. My neighbor was broken into in broad daylight on a Sunday afternoon recently by an Asian gang who were armed. I spoke to the police. I went out there and the police shouted at me to get back inside. Well, did they come? No. Like how they did, because they don't respond to those types of crimes. So that's the first thing. It's like, I'm not a doom monger. I'm listening to my audience, but I'm also living this. I'm experiencing this every single day. And I'm not part of the elite class that are going to pretend that this isn't going on because they happen to live in a very posh suburb and they can get their either business funded or state sponsored vehicles everywhere, so they're not actually having to go out there, see the destruction on the tubes, see the vandalism on the tubes, see the homeless problem. So that's the first thing. I'm living it. Now, in terms of what are the 3 biggest threats to the United Kingdom? Well, firstly, and this is one of the things that I guess makes me quite cancelled now, because I would at the top of the list say the Islam threat to the UK. I would say there is a democratic threat to the UK, and I would say there is a free speech threat to the UK. So for me, they are the three number one problems that we're facing.
So could we go into each one? I don't think I've talked ever on my show about the Islam threat, so I want to give space to do that now. So why is that a threat?
Well, what we are fundamentally seeing is people taking power who have been very open about the fact, and by the way, this is not a conspiracy theory. You know, I can produce all the receipts for you here, who have been very open about the fact that they want there to be Muslims in power in all of the main offices of state in the United Kingdom. And they have a very powerful network, very, very well-funded people who intend to make this happen. Well, why is that a problem, you might say? I say because we are a Christian country, and that is absolutely fundamental to what we need to be if we want to maintain the traditions and the freedom of Western democracy, which I do. Now, I say this, by the way, quite boldly as a gay man, because I know what is taught in the mosques of East London, where I used to live. I have spoken on my show to gay men who have been de-radicalized, but were at the point, Rob, of committing bombing attacks on Canary Wharf because they were so entrenched by the hard ideology of Islam. These are gay men, right? And they have also told me that in those mosques, they are taught on a daily basis that gay men should be pushed off the top of buildings in the United Kingdom. And by the way, these are British-born people, on the whole, who are being radicalized in the mosques of East London. And we're not talking about that enough. And it's not just about the fact I'm a gay man. I mean, to me, that's actually quite irrelevant to the way that I tend to live my life. But I'm raising it because this is a religion that simply doesn't want me to be able to exist. So if someone says that I'm Islamophobia for speaking about the Islam threat to the United Kingdom, well, I would be very clear that that religion getting into power poses a direct threat to me. If you are a woman, it also poses a direct threat to you. This is a religion that doesn't believe women should play any role in public life, doesn't even believe that a woman should be able to leave the house with anything other than their eyes covered. And that's not a society that I want to live in. I used to live in Tower Hamlets in East London. I saw that, and I saw the threat of that type of extreme Islam coming to power. And it is coming to power. We have a Home Secretary now called Shabana Mahmood, and lots of people are predicting that she will be the first Muslim Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. There's already a push on the Labour left for her to replace Slippery Starmer, as I call him, the failed Prime Minister. But you'll also see there will be an equal push to make Sadiq Khan the first Muslim Prime Minister. They want to have a few options. Now, Shabana Mahmood has spoken openly, and again, I can produce these receipts for you. It's all on video. She has said quite openly that her Muslim faith is the absolute number one fundamental driver to everything she does in her life. Bigger than her family, bigger than her country, bigger than her party, bigger than her politics. That's concerning to me. We are a Christian country. That is concerning to me. And the demographic change is so stark, Rob, that what we are seeing is, and again, you can crunch the numbers on this, and it's all there. People don't like doing it because it doesn't fit the narrative, but we are seeing a very real possibility that within a decade, maybe two, we will have most of the major cities of the United Kingdom a Muslim majority. Now, this is not a fantasy because these cities are already a white minority, which will concern some people. It won't concern other people. For me, I'm not bothered by what the color of anyone's skin is. But I am absolutely concerned that we have a push for, I believe, the United Kingdom to become an Islam country.
Wow. And what would you say to the people who would call you a racist?
Well, it's certainly not racist. I mean, you could argue that it is Islamophobic. And of course, there is a push in, well, certain parts of the government and certainly on the left to make Islamophobia illegal, to make having this type of conversation illegal. Now, let me be very clear. People can practice whatever religion they choose. I absolutely believe in freedom of religion, freedom of expression. But my belief is that if you want to take over our country with your religion, our Christian country, our Church of England country, that's where I have a problem. If you want to bring sectarian politics to our country, which is happening. I mean, we have 5 MPs already that have been elected in Parliament as Islamists. We have Jeremy Corbyn, the former leader of the Labour Party, and Zahra Sultana setting up what is effectively an Islamist party, where they care much more about the people of Gaza than they do about the people of Birmingham. I have a fundamental problem with that. But it's not about racism at all. I mean, it's completely irrelevant what ethnicity someone is. To me, this is about a religion that doesn't have the, doesn't promote the type of society, the type of freedom that we are accustomed to in the West. And as I say, they are quite clear that they want to take over. And they are quite clear. And by the way, if you look at, for example, the former First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf, who is now a big part of this network, by the way, this network to bring Muslims to all positions of power in the United Kingdom, I believe he is also an anti-white racist. And you only have to look at the speech that he delivered in the Scottish Parliament, where he went through all of the various positions, senior positions of power in Scotland, and said, white, this is disgusting. You know, this person in Scotland is white. This person in Scotland is white. This person in Scotland is white. Now, Scotland, Rob, is a 94% white country. So why is it a surprise that the vast majority of the positions of power are filled by white people? My argument would be it is these Islam extremists who are bringing the issue of race into it. Humza Yousaf, actually, I mean, I call him Humza Useless because he was so completely incompetent, totally incompetent. He was the most incompetent minister in Scheming Sturgeon's government, yet somehow he became First Minister of Scotland, failed at that job, was booted out within a year. Now he has the cheek to try and come for white people and say there's too many white people in power in Scotland when Scotland is a 94% white country. But you've got to look at the demographics and you've got to look at the demographic change and the fact that on the whole, people who are white English are not having children at a particularly high rate. And so there are serious concerns about demographic change and about a push of a religion which wants to become the dominant power in the United Kingdom. Now, I'll stress again, I've got no problem if people want to be in a Muslim country, but for all of the reasons that I've described, including the fact that this is a religion that doesn't believe in my right to exist, I don't want that religion taking over and having the power in this country.
So I want to come back to your other 2 things in a moment, you know, the 3 things that are majorly wrong with the UK, but this seems like a perfect opportunity to ask you what you think about Gary Neville saying that the problem is middle-aged white men.
I mean,
of which I guess you and I might fit into that category.
Angry.
It's our fault.
Yeah, of course.
Sorry, Gary.
But it's also his fault. I mean, he spoke about angry middle-aged white men. Well, that is Gary Neville, right? That is Gary Neville, because his anger is at people like us being patriotic, wanting to save our country. What was so shocking to me is that I read the accounts of the workers in his company where he had pulled down the Union Jack flag. And they said there were other nationalities' flags flying in the building. I think there was a Bulgarian flag flying. He didn't pull those down. He had a problem specifically with the Union Jack. And I actually think he is the worst type of Englishman, because do you remember when he was playing for England, he would not sing the national anthem. He would not sing God Save the Queen. So I actually think it's liberal, unpatriotic people like him who are on the left and who seem to hate everything that we're about, who have developed this woke hatred of what it means to be English and what it means to be British and feel ashamed about our history. He's just the type of person that would say, oh, the British Empire was a terrible thing. We should pay reparations. You know, just like Lenny Henry's wanting to pay 18 trillion pounds worth of reparations, which would bankrupt this country. I actually think people like him are the biggest threat to our country because they are self-loathing. They are prepared to give all of this away. But the people aren't with Gary Lineker, with Gary Lineker either, but they're not with Gary Neville. There seems to be something about footballers called Gary who are middle-aged, angry white men. So no, I mean, to me, he is the problem. He is the problem.
Wow. So what about your second major issue with the UK? I think you said something about lack of democracy.
Yeah, so I think there's a huge subversion of democracy going on. We're seeing it with the fact that Slippery Starmer is literally cancelling local elections. He's already done it once. He's planning to do it again to stop the march of Reform UK. But to me, it's actually much bigger than that, because I think Reform UK could also end up being a threat to democracy as well. At this point, they're not. But what we're seeing happen is the smashing of the two-party system, right? But
that's a good thing in a way.
Well, it is a good thing. It's a great thing. I mean, I think the two-party system, the uni party, as we call it, the Conservatives and Labour, has to be smashed.
Yeah.
But what is it going to be replaced with? And what you find, Rob, is that the moment a party gets close to power, all of their talk about changing our democratic system so that it is fair, so that it's not a two-party system, goes out the window. So the example with Reform UK is that all of a sudden they're way ahead in the polls and there are these crazy historic majorities being predicted. So all of a sudden they don't seem to be all that committed to the idea of voting reform. And that is a huge mistake.
I mean, that's like turkeys voting for Christmas, though, isn't it? If you're the incumbent party in power.
So then we're never going to change. And we're constantly going to have this first past the post system, which over-represents one particular party. So we saw it at the most recent election where Slippery Starmer and Labour won this massive mandate, huge mandate, you know, a majority of hundreds in the House of Commons. But actually, they were never that popular. He did not receive a massive amount of votes. He did not receive a massive percentage of the votes, but it was because of our system. We were sick of the Conservatives. They had let us down over a number of years. Reform UK at that point received about 5 million votes, but weren't a massive force as a party, so only won 5 seats in Parliament. That's not democracy. But it's also not democracy for Reform UK to keep to this system just because it might benefit them at the next election. So I genuinely believe in electoral reform. There's lots of different ways that could happen, but I fundamentally believe in proportional representation. And what I don't believe in is people on the right, and it is people on the right, and I'm on the right, so these are my people who have said for years and years and years, oh, you can't do proportional representation because it just means you're going to get a left-wing government forever and ever, and you know you're going to get the Lib Dems and Labour and the Greens in a coalition. It's just not true. It is just not true. We are in the United Kingdom, a small C conservative country, and what would happen if we had proportional representation is we would finally have political parties that represent us. So the reason that the Conservative Party failed over so many years is because it pretended to be a broad church, which meant that effectively it had people who believed in true conservative policies like, say, Suella Braverman and Robert Jenrick, completely outvoted by people who were actually on the left, right? Penny Mordaunt's an example, Caroline Noakes, but there's a whole load of these people. Theresa May, she was our Prime Minister, for God's sake. And really, they should have been in a party like the Liberal Democrats. So what would happen is there would be a split on the right. We would finally have parties that actually represented us, and you would vote for that party. And then, yes, there would be some form of coalition government, most likely. But again, I'm not afraid of coalition government, because what it does is it keeps parties in power honest. We have seen what happens, Rob, when parties are given unbridled power. They don't give a damn what the public think. Tony Blair didn't give a damn what the public think. He invaded Iraq anyway, didn't he? Look at where that got us. The Conservative Party didn't give a damn about the fact that we demanded the end to mass immigration over years and years and years. No, we still got the Boris wave anyway, when over 1 million people were flooding into our country in a year. So I don't want governments to have unbridled power. Slippery Starmer currently has unbridled power. It's not a good thing. Proportional representation will keep parties honest. And there's a lot of people who are saying to me at the moment, oh, Dan, yeah, I've got issues with Reform UK, and I certainly do, but they're our only option. So I'm going to vote for them, even though they're maybe not saying all the right things on issues like Islam, for example, but I'm going to vote for them anyway because they're the only option. Well, no, that's not how I want our system to work. And the great thing about proportional representation is that if you vote for a party, they get that share of the seats in the House of Commons. Is it going to happen? Probably not, because the system is corrupt, and Nigel Farrage will see the fact that actually he can get in on a landslide under first past the post, and he'll just hope that the same thing doesn't happen to him, where he's booted out after one term. But it's risky. It's risky. And I would like to see Reform UK stick to its previous pledge of proportional representation. But you will have seen on a whole load of other policies, from tax to NHS reform, as soon as they come close to power, all of that radical stuff has gone out the window.
Why?
Because they're scared. They're scared of being hammered by the mainstream media, and it's weak. It's so weak.
But
and
are
it's
they scared?
pathetic.
I mean, they're not in yet, so how do
No,
we
but they're
know?
terrified, because they're terrified of the scare campaigns that have been running, for example, on NHS reform. Nigel Farrage believes in reform of the NHS. One of his number one advisors, Anne Widdecombe, absolutely believes in reform of the NHS. By the way, so do I.
So do I.
And I have for a very long time. What people don't realise, and it's a boring conversation and people don't want to have it, but the NHS, the National Health Service in the United Kingdom, is bankrupting this country. And if there's not serious reform, it will continue to bankrupt us. And Nigel was one of the only politicians in the country who was brave enough in the past to have that conversation. And there were loads of things that he believed in. But one thing was certainly that if you were paying for private insurance, there should be some type of tax rebate, because actually what you're doing is patriotic. You're saving the National Health Service for the people who really need it, for example. I also believe it's absolutely insane, Rob, that as relatively wealthy people, we don't have to pay to go and see a GP. That's insane to me. I don't believe in free of the point of use, because it doesn't work. It doesn't work when it comes to supply and demand. If something's free, people use it when they don't need to use it. And that's why the system is completely overwhelmed and you can't get an appointment with your GP, for example. So I don't believe in that system. Nigel, I know, doesn't believe in it. But because there was this massive campaign that was being launched against him by the mainstream media and the Labour Party, which was, if Nigel Farrage gets into power, he's going to take away your beloved NHS. We're going to have an American-style health system, which is ludicrous, by the way. Never what Nigel Farrage has proposed. Certainly not the types of systems that exist in Germany and France and Australia, where, trust me, you get far better healthcare than you do in the United Kingdom. And if you're diagnosed with cancer, you are less likely to die in those countries. Surely that's what we want, right? That is what we want for ourselves. That's what we want for our families. But because of this scare campaign being run by the MSM, by Labour, Nigel just reversed the opinion, his position, like immediately. He just gave way. It was like, no changes to the NHS, all free at the point of use, nothing changes. Well, I'm sorry, that's not what is required to save this country.
And the third thing, what's the third thing?
Well, the third thing is free speech.
Oh.
And to be honest, this absolutely relates to all of the conversations that we're having today. But if you look at the threat of Islam, for example, there are literally plans in place to introduce some type of Islamophobia law, which, as I say, could make a conversation like this potentially illegal. That is chilling. It is chilling. We don't have blasphemy laws in this country. We should not. But free speech comes into a whole load of things. I mean, Slippery Starmer is absolutely attempting to control the mainstream media. Like, you look at the fact that he wants the off-communists, as I call them. This is the state regulator of the media in the United Kingdom, effectively the body that actually ended up being the final straw that got me cancelled from GB News. They want to stop Nigel Farrage being able to present on GB News, for example. So there's a whole load of control of the mainstream media going on. But actually what they're most concerned about and what they most want to shut down is this revolution, right? So it's Disruptors, it's Outspoken, but it's also, Rob, and probably they view these guys as more of a threat, it's the citizen journalists that are on the ground, covering the hotel migrant protests, covering what's going on with migrants up and down the country, actually going into the HMOs where they live, going into the hospitals where they're being treated. And they want to delegitimize that type of journalism, which is, I believe, revealing the truth. And so there's a whole load of things that are being done to try and shut down free speech in this country. There's like libel tourism, abuse of the libel laws, which makes it very impossible for someone to risk speaking out about a rich person, for example. There's a huge pressure being put on the social media giants to shut down free speech. And when people challenged Starmer over this, he literally said, well, if you don't agree with my censorship, then I believe that you're a supporter of pedophiles and you're a supporter of Jimmy Savile. He literally said that. I mean, that's not an exaggeration. And it's nuts because what people are doing is they are hiding behind trying to protect children as a way to actually shut down genuine debate. I mean, we've seen it with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle too, for example, because they fundamentally want to shut down their critics, right, on social media, people like me, people like Piers Morgan. They don't want us speaking out. So they've pretended, oh, no, but the reason we want this censorship is because we have to protect our children. And obviously, there are tragic cases about what's happened with children being bullied via social media. But the solution is not censorship for all. Okay, the solution is not the Online Safety Act, because what it's actually doing, Rob, is encouraging censorship of difficult conversations, important conversations, conversations like the ones we're having now, aimed at adults, because there's a chance a child might view it. Well, I'm sorry, that's not good enough for me. I'm a free speech absolutist. We've got to have these conversations. And by the way, kids are going to find this stuff whether they like it or not. And all this so-called censorship is doing is driving them into the grips of the dark web, which is far, far worse than anything that you might find on YouTube. So the solution for all of these losers, these people who are losing the argument, whether it's Keir Starmer, whether it's Harry and Meghan, is let's censor things. Let's take away free speech and let's cover up why we're really doing this by saying, oh, we want to protect the kids. Well, look, we all want to protect the kids. We all do. But as you know, kids have always been bullied in a whole load of horrendous ways. Technology is now the latest way being used, but it's not an excuse to take away free speech.
And what about like these 12,000 arrests, is it? And, people even going to prison for social media posts. I mean, I guess you must think that's pretty ridiculous.
I mean, it's insane. I mean, we have more arrests for social media posts than despot countries like Russia. I mean, it's absolutely nuts.
Wow. So we're becoming a communist country then?
Well, I think we are. And I think we're becoming an authoritarian country. And I don't really think that any of the arguments that people in power make about, oh no, we don't get involved in the justice system stand anymore. Because trust me, I mean, I followed very closely the case of Lucy Connolly, who was the grieving mother who was jailed for 31 months because of one post on X on the night of the Southport massacre, which she deleted, by the way. She went out for a walk with the dog. She deleted the post within hours. She was locked up for 31 months. There were loads of extenuating circumstances in her case. The fact that she had lost her son because of NHS neglect, her baby son. And so she was traumatized by seeing what Axel Rudakabana did in that Taylor Swift dance class. But even if that wasn't the case, she posted something which some people were offended by. Yeah, I don't think it was violent in any way. It was maybe unpleasant, but she was not only locked up for 31 months, the whole justice system was designed, Rob, to come down on her like a ton of bricks, to provide a warning to the rest of us mere mortals. Be careful what you post, because you could end up being like Lucy Connolly. So she was in remand. She was not a threat to anyone. I mean, we've literally seen Jihad al-Shami, right, who is our most recent Islamist terrorist who attempted to blow himself up at a synagogue in Manchester, but failed, however, did still see 2 people killed as a result of his terror attack. And he was out on bail for rape. Clearly a dangerous man, right? An Islamist extremist on bail for rape. Lucy Connolly, behind bars, locked up over a long period of time for a post on X. It was insanity. We all know it was insanity. But I think all of this is designed to try and send a chilling warning to everyone. Just don't say what you're thinking. And that's a dangerous society, don't you think? If you feel something, if you see something happening around you, but you think, oh, I can't say this. I've got kids. I might get locked up. And I see that going on. I see so many people who are too scared, or who say to me, oh, Dan, you're brave. And it's like, what a crazy thing to say. I'm a journalist. I'm a long-term journalist who worked in the mainstream and just believes in revealing the truth. There should be nothing brave about that. But we're living in a country where journalists have actually been targeted. Alison Pearson, my friend at the Daily Telegraph, knock on the door from the police. Katie Hopkins, regular guest on this show, recently arrested or at least forced into a police interview under caution for something that she had said on her own Katie's Arms shows, referring to herself as a spaz.
I couldn't get my head around that with Katie. What did they arrest her for?
They can justify anything under this sort of idea of hate speech and incitement.
But it was self-deprecation.
Mm-hmm. And she still hasn't been cleared.
No.
I mean, she will be.
Yeah.
Because I think what keeps happening, Rob, is the police take on these cases, think they're doing the right thing, and then are immediately freaked out by the backlash. But the problem is when it's not Katie Hopkins, when it's not Alison Pearson, when it's not Graham Linehan. The problem is when it's you and you're arrested and no one is speaking up for you.
Yeah.
Because Lucy Connolly became the public face of what was, I believe, the most revolting attempt to stun British patriots into silence. And probably the case that was most upsetting to me was that of Peter Lynch, who was the father of, I think, 4, good family man who had been a protester, right? And he'd been an anti-establishment protester in the United Kingdom for many years. So he'd protested against Brexit, he'd protested against COVID, he believed in the deep state, he believed that the government were not looking out for its people, loads of things that I believe. And he was on the streets and he had his signs and this is what he did. This was his way to express his democratic right to free expression. And after the Southport massacre, he found himself, and obviously he chose to go there, at one of the protests outside a migrant hotel. But I've seen the police body cam footage, Rob, and I've read the court transcripts. And there is absolutely no suggestion that Peter Lynch was at all violent towards any police officer. He called them scum. He said that they were protecting child killers. Now, I struggle to see how him saying that was anything other than factual. Again, some people might find it offensive, some people might find it inappropriate, but it was his opinion based on what he'd seen in regards to the Southport massacre. Anyway, he was locked up. pleaded guilty, which was a crazy decision. But of course, everyone was virtually forced into pleading guilty because they were remanded in custody and told, if you don't plead guilty, you're going to get an even longer jail sentence. But his jail sentence was insane. I believe it was over 2 years. And he is said to have killed himself in prison. The details of this case are so disturbing to me because we're not being told the whole truth about what happened. Most recently, we've learned via one of the hearings of his inquest that the day before his death, he had been charged with a crime behind bars in prison, but we're not able to know what that was. And remember, Martin Brunt, who is the crime correspondent for Sly News, had reported that so-called right-wing protesters like Peter Lynch were going to be targeted by Muslim gangs in prison. And so Peter Lynch lost his life for expressing his democratic right to protest against the regime. And this happened to a whole load of people. Most of their cases are forgotten and their lives have been destroyed. And it just is meant to provide a warning shot to all of us.
So why are you staying here then?
Well, I'm staying here to fight. And don't get me wrong, sometimes there are times when it feels very appealing. And obviously there's a lot of my contemporaries, Father Calvin Robinson, for example, who has gone overseas. There's loads of people who I respect. And don't get me wrong, I've always been very clear that if the authoritarian state becomes too much, where it's impossible for me to report the truth about what's going on in the United Kingdom, then I might have to do the whole pirate radio thing, right? And sort of be doing my show from somewhere outside the UK just so I'm not impacted by British censorship. But I understand that most people don't have the opportunity to leave the country, and they, I think, want to see people that are going to stay and fight in lots of different ways. And obviously for me, it's via the medium of independent broadcasting. That's what I do. I'm a journalist. I've never wanted to get into politics. I have no desire of taking on any type of elected position. That's never been something I want to do. So what I feel I can do is keep all politicians honest, keep the mainstream media honest. And by the way, that includes mainstream media organizations that are said to be on the right, because actually, whether it's the Daily Telegraph or Talk TV or GB News or The Sun or the Daily Mail, lots of places that I've previously worked, very often I see them giving in to this narrative too. And I think it's also important to call them out. So that's what I'm able to do. But don't get me wrong, I don't judge someone anymore when they tell me they're leaving the country. I completely understand it. There are huge challenges here, financially, in terms of safety, in terms of security. So I get it. I get it. People are unfortunately able to go overseas and immediately have a far better quality of life in a whole load of ways. And I think rather than attacking those people or treating those types of people as traitors, we need to understand why. You know, the money that is pouring out of this country is utterly, utterly terrifying, given you know what percentage of tax the top, 0.1% of earners pay. It's astronomical. And those people are leaving.
Silver has crashed. It's back to its price in 1974, and I'm going to buy more. And if you'd like to learn how to invest and build multiple streams of recurring income, I recommend you join Money.School. Money.School is my global financial education platform to help as many people on this planet get better financial knowledge. For less than 4 Starbucks coffees a month, there are hundreds of hours of courses, resources, and masterclasses going back a decade to teach how to make, manage, and multiply money and gain financial freedom. So join thousands of other money and freedom seekers on the link Money.School and start today your journey to financial freedom and more money. And on the note of finances, what do you think is the state of the economy? Are we seeing the death of the middle class? Why are so many millionaires and billionaires leaving?
We absolutely are. And the economy is in deep, deep trouble. And economists who I respect are very clear that there is a crash on the way. But for me, what I find most disturbing is the fact that crises are so often now created by our elite class. So if you take the example of Liz Truss, who was a prime minister who I supported when she was in power, and I have supported her since she left or since she was forced out of Downing Street, the economic situation that Rachel Reeves, our current chancellor, finds herself in today is on a whole load of levels far, far worse, right, than the situation that was affecting Liz Truss. And you can look at it in lots of ways, and I won't go into it because I'm not an expert, but whether it's gilt yields or borrowing or a whole load of very specific economic issues, we are in a worse state than we were in under Liz Truss, right? But the media are not reporting on this as if it's a crisis. They're not reporting on it in the way that they were with Liz Truss because, as she says, she wasn't just chucked under a bus. She was literally forcibly thrown under the wheels. You know, it's like they did not want her to succeed. They wanted her gone from power because she was challenging the orthodoxy on a whole load of these things, from taxes to growth. And
who's they?
Well, I think it's the deep state, and the deep state encompasses a whole load of people. But by the way, including the Bank of England, including the Treasury, including the Snivel service, as I call it, you know, all of the people that man these departments paid for by us, but who actually have a worldview and believe that they are more important than the politicians, and the politicians aren't really there to make genuine decisions. I mean, Liz Truss says that the last prime minister who was actually in charge of the United Kingdom was Tony Blair. And that's chilling. That is terrifying. And even now, you see, because they think it's a clever line, because the mainstream media has demonized this woman, you'll see Starmer or Reeves try and blame Truss for something that's happening now. It's like, she was prime minister for 6 weeks. She didn't get to do a damn thing because you destroyed her. And none of these things are in the realm of conspiracy anymore. This has happened. And it is happening. And there is a completely different reaction to the financial hellscape that Labour have plunged us into than the very small blip that Liz Truss faced after the mini budget. And again, I've interviewed her. She goes into a lot of depth about how this happened and about why it happened. But I think what people fundamentally need to know is that there are anti-democratic forces out there who will try and remove a leader from power if they want to genuinely shake up the system. And our system genuinely needs to be shaken up. And of course, this is one of the challenges that is now facing Nigel Farrage. And I have been critical earlier in this interview of Nigel Farrage in terms of the fact that he's not going hard enough and strong enough, but he's also going to have to be seriously armed with mega muscle, because remember, from day one, he will have the deep state and the blob and the Snivel service trying to ensure that he is a failure and that his policies do not happen. And so what he needs to do is really insist on fundamental change, right, on a whole load of levels. And I think that also means being able to hire and fire the people in Westminster who are frustrating change happening.
Maybe we'll come back to that. I'd like to ask you if this is as bad as what everyone seems to be saying, but what do you really think about the digital ID?
Well, I think digital ID is absolutely chilling, but what I think is quite interesting is that there's so much incompetence with this government, right? I'm sort of slightly hopeful that they'll
spend 12 billion and fuck it up.
Yeah, I just don't think they're going to be able to get it through. Honestly, no. I don't think they're going to be able to get it through, both practically and politically, because this is a weak administration. This is such a fundamentally weak prime minister, right? He is more unpopular than any prime minister in history ever, bar none. We hate this guy. We don't trust this guy. He thought he was pulling a clever trick with digital ID by playing into our genuine and very real, and by the way, completely accurate concerns about mass immigration. But it's ludicrous, because there are loads of countries in Europe that have a form of digital ID where immigration has not been at all curbed by it. And if you think digital ID is going to stop illegals invading the country and taking part in drug trafficking, county lines, prostitution rings, terrorism rings, it's ludicrous. What businesses that I've just mentioned there give a damn if you have a national insurance number or not, because they're not paying through the usual systems. So Starmer's whole reason for introducing digital ID is a joke. It's not going to stop illegal immigration, even slightly. Then he's really pushing this whole idea of convenience, right? But when have you ever seen the government or the state do something that works properly and that is convenient? Never. Every time I have to deal with the state, Rob, every single time, be it applying for a passport, paying a parking ticket, whatever it happens to be, it's a nightmare. It is an absolute nightmare because the state don't know how to make things work because they've never had to, because these people are in jobs for life and they are on the whole lazy bastards who don't particularly want to go into an office, don't want to make things happen. They don't have the same energy or belief that you do, for example, running a private company. And I think just look at HMRC. Look at HMRC, which is one of the most, and I mean, I've had my own issues with them, but it is one of the most ridiculously run departments in the world, which take years to do anything. So fundamentally, the idea that digital ID will also bring any type of convenience is a joke. This will be a horrible system, but it is also, and this is something that I've warned of for many years, but I should just say it again, and I'm sure I've said it to you before, but this is also the start, mark my words, and this is why we have to fight this tooth and nail, as boring as it may be, as frustrating as it may be. It is the start of a Chinese-style social credit system being introduced into the back door into the United Kingdom. And for those wondering what that would mean, well, it means things like, if you put your rubbish out less, you might get some extra points. You know, if you don't take your annual holiday, you might get some extra points. But what if you start badly behaving too? That's when you start losing your points. You start being regarded a bad citizen. And while to begin with, we would obviously have governments saying, oh no, of course we're not going to do that. Look at what's happened in China. Look at how they use technology to control their population. Look at the draconian measures that were enforced throughout that country during the COVID pandemic. We do not want to go there. So it's one area where I will give Nigel Farrage real credit for. He has pledged to go to jail rather than sign up to digital ID. That I respect. That is the sort of leadership we need.
Yeah, because I think about all these systems. You've got HMRC, very powerful system. They can essentially crack into your bank, probably now crack into your crypto. They're talking about taking your savings interests at source. So you've got that invasion. Then you've got the Online Safety Act, which is monitoring everything you say. Then you've got the central bank digital currency and maybe the death of cash. And, you know, your money controlled digitally, and now this digital ID. And if all those four systems start to integrate, is that not mass population control? Like George Orwell wouldn't have been able to predict that.
Of course, and this is what the globalists want. And I've always said that Slippery Starmer is just the puppet on the strings of Tony Blair. And Tony Blair is at the absolute heart of globalist organizations, and he's even infiltrated the White House recently, which is so disappointing. You know, it's like, Trump, wake up. He's a bad guy, okay? He might be very charming, but he's a very, very bad guy, and you don't want him anywhere near what you're doing.
Why is he a bad guy? Sorry to jump in.
I mean, where do I start? Where do I start?
Take it from the top.
I mean,
interestingly, let me just get this in as well. Isn't his son the person behind who will run the system of the digital ID? I'm pretty sure he's
denied that, and his company has denied that. But certainly his son is absolutely involved in lots of these spaces from a business point of view.
Right.
whether he's directly involved in digital ID or not. But when it comes to Blair, I mean, this is a guy who has been all about consolidating globalist power for decades. He was prepared to give up our sovereignty, wasn't he? And he has been prepared to overturn and thwart the biggest democratic vote in British history in terms of our decision to leave the European Union. But I would argue far more concerning is his roles in organizations like the World Economic Forum, which is all about taking away sovereignty from nation states. Blair is one of the global elites who thinks that he can run the world with a very, very small group of people better than any country being able to choose its own government. So what he intends to do and has done in the United Kingdom, because by the way, so many of the issues we're talking about today, Rob, have been as a result of changes made by Blair post-1997 and his government, which was truly powerful, is to just chip away at the nation state, chip away at our natural God-given powers that we should have as a country. And Starmer buys into that. You know, Starmer was very open in that interview on the fake news agents with Emily Maitlis that he prefers Davos to Westminster. He's the Prime Minister of the country. That's an absolutely appalling thing to say. I mean, I would go as far to say that is a treacherous thing to say. He said you can get more done there. Again, how disturbing is that? Like, think of the true chilling nature of that. A prime minister of the country, I mean, he was leader of the opposition at the time when he made that comment, saying you can get more done in Davos, which is really the heart of the internationals and the globalists. You can get more done there than you can in Westminster. Well, what does that say about the sovereignty of our parliament and how much we've actually given away? And Tony Blair is one of the evil geniuses who is behind that. And I mean, he looks like an evil genius now. He looks like Gollum or Gandalf, sort of a combination of the two, because he's got like the Gandalf hair. And he is an evil genius because he knows how the elites work.
Mm. In your 20 years of journalism, what's been the most shocking thing you've discovered?
So this is really depressing, but I think, to be honest, the most shocking thing that I discovered was that most journalists, certainly most journalists in the mainstream, have absolutely no desire to question the narrative. They are so happy to just have a comfortable life, go along with what they're told, really cast aspersions on anyone who they're told to. You know, Tommy Robinson's an evil man, so we're just going to try and prove that Tommy Robinson's an evil man. And for me, the real eye-opening moment of that and the most depressing moment was during COVID, because that was when I was like, oh my God, these people who I used to respect, these people who I used to think were actual journalists and would question authority and were there to ensure that we had freedom and that we maintained our freedoms and that we kept democracy and that we weren't put through, you know, enforced medical experiments, all of that stuff, literally folded like a cheap suit. And that's when I lost my faith, really. And I see it now with stories on a daily basis. I mean, I've used the example of Tommy Robinson, but you could also use the example of the Pakistani Muslim rape gangs. But, you know, there's a whole load of stories. Journalists on the whole tend to hunt as a pack and don't really go against the grain and often value being close to power, you know, value their proximity to power more than they do their ability to tell the truth. And I mean, nothing proved that more than during COVID, because our media class just gave in. I mean, it was bizarre.
Mm. And what do you think of Tommy Robinson?
Well, I think he's a real hero, actually. And I think he is completely derided by the elite class. They lie about him. And I think he's an inspirational figure for a lot of people in this country, and I understand why. I think he's a working class hero, and I think a lot of the elite class in this country just despise the working class, and so will find any way to do down the working class, whether that means branding them far right or racist. But I think, again, this links to my previous point, Rob, which is that the mainstream media have failed in their responsibility in terms of covering this man. Camilla Tominey, who is now the flagship presenter on my former employer, GB News, went on ITV's This Morning and described Tommy Robinson, when he was behind bars, by the way, which was gutless because he couldn't respond, although he has since responded on my show, Outspoken, and various other platforms, but at the time went on This Morning and said Tommy Robinson is a white supremacist. Now, that is a lie. Okay, you can make a lot of calls about Tommy Robinson. You could certainly say he's anti-Islam, right? Some people would say that would mean he's Islamophobic, even though you know that's not a term that I believe in and don't believe it's a term that should exist. It's a made-up term by the likes of the Muslim Brotherhood. But she went on and described him as a white supremacist. Now, that is simply not true. She knew it wasn't true, but she had to try and back it up. So she then made a podcast for the Daily Telegraph where she brought in one of Tommy Robinson's former disciples who has turned on him, very weird woman, and again tried to make this woman back up her claim that Tommy Robinson is a white supremacist. And remember, this woman is an enemy of Tommy Robinson now, but even she was like, well, no, it's not about color. His best mates are black and Asian. It's not about that. It's about the fact that he doesn't want Islam taking over Christianity in the United Kingdom. And Camilla Tominey's response to that was, well, if you don't want Christianity to be our main religion, could you argue that that means that you're wanting some type of supremacy? And I thought, oh my God, is that how far we've fallen? Like, a journalist who should be someone that people on the right can trust, given she works for the Daily Telegraph and she's the flagship presenter now at GB News, is trying to back up calling Tommy Robinson a white supremacist because he believes in keeping Britain as a Christian country. Well, you've lost the plot. And yes, I am someone who believes that Tommy Robinson has an important voice. I'm not a supporter because I'm not a supporter of anyone, and Tommy actually asked me to speak at the Unite the Kingdom rally. And I was very honored that he asked, but I didn't want to speak at Unite the Kingdom. It's not because I didn't support that event and I thought that event was incredible, but I said, no, what I want to do is I want to cover this event. And I want to cover this event. And I was very honest with him as an independent journalist. So look, if you do something wrong, or if I see trouble, or if I see something that I disagree with, I will call it out and I will report it. Because sure enough, what happened, Rob, is there was no mainstream media coverage of Unite the Kingdom. The only coverage was of some bad behavior which took place outside of the perimeter of the rally itself. They didn't cover what was said on stage. They didn't cover Tommy Robinson's incredible 20-minute interview with Elon Musk, where he spoke about the state of the United Kingdom, an interview which, by the way, Piers Morgan has been trying and failing to get for the past year. Not a word on any of that. They covered a tiny number of arrests by a tiny number of folk who were outside the perimeter of the main rally. That was how they covered it. Well, guess what? I covered the whole thing. I went live for 6 hours on YouTube, every single speech, interviewed the participants, but I was also in the crowd and I was getting a feel for the event and I was looking to see where there was trouble, if there was trouble. And I got over 1 million views on YouTube for that broadcast. It's our biggest ever Outspoken broadcast thus far. But that's because no one else was covering the truth. People just wanted to see what was being said, see what the participants were saying. even the so-called right-wing channels, Telegraph, GB News, Talk TV, came at that event with an agenda.
Wow. Yeah, I saw, it was funny because people were there saying, there's millions of people here, and then the mainstream media were like, 120,000.
It was ludicrous.
150,000.
It was ludicrous.
Apparently Sky paid for the aerial views and then didn't publish it.
Yeah. Well, what was actually very helpful is The Guardian were one of the people that sent a drone up, which were able to make it very easy to predict the crowd numbers. I mean,
how many were there, do you think?
Oh, well, look, I predicted on the day well over 1 million, and I absolutely stand by that. I know Tommy believes it was much bigger than that.
Yeah.
But
it wasn't 120 or 150,000.
Oh my God, no, Rob, honestly, okay, let's think about this for 1 second. Wembley Stadium, right, holds 100,000 people, over 100,000 people, which means, when you get the aerial shot of the fans leaving Wembley Stadium, and there's just that one little street which goes into the station at Wembley Stadium. That was the amount of people that you had just trying to get from Waterloo Station across the bridge. Okay? Yeah. That was just a tiny, tiny portion of the crowd. And of course, the police say, we only take the crowd figures from a certain perimeter of the event. And, a whole load of excuses. But I mean, what was hilarious is that the counter-protest probably only got about 5,000 people. Do you see what I mean? So the idea that 150,000 is some type of tiny number anyway is for the birds. But the point is, it wasn't 150,000 people. It was well over 1 million people. And again, this is the problem we're in now.
Yeah.
We don't get honesty.
So I want to challenge us both, because we were talking before we went on air about the algorithm. And I actually wrote a LinkedIn post this morning, something along the lines of, London has fallen, 2.7 million views. The UK in a state of depression, 2.9 million views, 2 posts I did recently. And then, how to manage your time well, a post I did recently, 5,800 views. And I do these experiments from time to time where I try and post something positive or educational or uplifting, and it gets a very small percentage of the views compared to London has fallen and the death of the UK. And I look in the mirror at times and I check myself that I'm not just becoming a slave to the algorithm. That's why I asked you about, are you being a doom monger? What do you really think of the state of the UK? So let's have an open conversation about the algorithms, because, I want to get views, and your livelihood now, the algorithm can make or break your entire livelihood. How do you play that dance? Do you sometimes feel like you were controlled by billionaires and now you're controlled by the algorithm?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a huge issue, actually. What I obviously always have tried to do through my whole career, because I come from the Sun newspaper, I come from tabloid newspapers, is I absolutely believe that the news can be entertaining, can be fun, can be enjoyable, can be controversial, can be dramatic, and I want people to watch, right? So I really do believe in that, because what we've always seen through the years is huge snobbery about broadsheet newspapers or very posh TV shows which don't try to appeal to the masses, which means working the algorithm. But as a result, no one watches them. Or just a tiny portion of the elite class watch them. Well, what's the point of that? So for me, I want a mainstream audience. I want a populist audience. I want big numbers, because that is obviously how we get the message out. And it's also how you're a success, and being a success has always been a part of what I've done through my whole career. Obviously, right up until I launched the very first show at GB News, and it was predicted that we were going to be off air at that point within 3 months. And Andrew Neil, who was the first chairman of GB News, quit because he couldn't cope. And I stayed and I stayed, and I turned that show, and therefore the channel, because, it was the flagship show on the channel, into a ratings success. So that matters to me. I do think there are issues at times with the algorithm because, of course, yes, negativity sells. But I guess I also see a lot of hope in terms of what I'm doing, because I am promoting now loads of amazing, young, up and coming YouTubers, citizen journalists, independent media stars, and they're getting numbers too. And that's great. Do you see what I mean? This isn't about me. It is about us creating a whole alternative network. And look, there are so many I could name check, but let me just name check a few, who have done great work over the past few months here in the United Kingdom. So AY Audits, Jack Hadders, Emma Speaks Freely, Based and Bougie, Steph the Alternate. These are all, and there will have been some amazing people that I've forgotten, and I'm really sorry about that. But these are Connor Tomlinson, Charlie Downs. Look, there's a whole load, but these are incredible, young, brave journalists who are not encumbered at all by the mainstream media, because they're not like me. They've never worked in the mainstream. So that they have none of the limitations of working in the mainstream media, thinking this is how we do things. Oh, should I be worried about this? Should I be concerned about this? They have none of that. And that for me is really exciting. And so, yes, even though there are, of course, challenges with the algorithm, I guess the positive is it is starting to also create these new stars, these new voices. Lauren the Insider is another one who's been doing some work with me and Urban Scoop recently. Her YouTube channel is flying in the very early days, and she's a mom and she has no big backing at all behind her. So yes, it's difficult, but where it's a great equalizer, I guess, is that you don't need a whole load of money and resource to launch your channel. In fact, and I won't be cruel, but I have seen some mainstream media names in recent weeks launch YouTube channels with massive backing, Rob, like huge Murdoch money backing. And they've got about 5,000 subscribers because people are not wanting what they're selling anymore. It's not about having a posh studio or the best equipment. It's not about that. It's about where are you getting the raw, authentic voices, honesty in reporting. And so while I do think there are lots of challenges with the algorithm, at the same time, I guess to be a little bit more positive, I'm also thinking it's allowing us to see these amazing, exciting, new journalistic voices. And certainly for me, over the past few months, because remembering I'm producing a show every single day from my studio. We do a lot of content. We make about 2.5 hours of content a day, right?
Wow.
And so I can't be out there on the ground that much. I try to be when I can. So this network of independent journalists, oh my God, they have been incredible, because it's like, I don't trust what the BBC is telling me outside the Epping Migrant Hotel, but I absolutely trust what Jack Hadders or AY Audits is telling me outside the hotel. And the great thing is I can watch the raw footage for myself to actually see what was happening without that sort of mainstream media edit on it.
So is there anything that you changed your mind on that the left or the far left convinced you of?
No.
I call shenanigans. I call bullshit.
I mean,
you're an open-minded guy. You have your beliefs and you're strong in your beliefs. I've got to know you well. But you are an open-minded guy. And I think if you were wrong about something or you changed your mind, I think you would.
Yeah, no, I would. But I don't think there's anything from the hard left, because honestly, Rob, what I have seen... No, because what I've seen from the hard left, especially over the past few years, is actually so disturbing that if anything, I feel like far, far more convinced that my positions are correct. So I'll give you the example of the death of Charlie Kirk, right? Now, the reaction that I saw from the left to his death was absolutely barbaric, inhumane, revolting. I'm not talking about everyone, of course.
No, but you've been celebrating it.
Yeah, but there was a hell of a lot of it. There was a hell of a lot of it. There was a hell of a lot of it. There was a hell of a lot of evil. And there was a hell of a lot of private celebration going on the left as well. And I thought about it a lot, right? And what is that about? Like, why are the woke left so truly evil? And I was having a conversation about it with my fiance, and I was sort of saying, who's the person who I probably sort of from a professional level despise the most in the United Kingdom on the left, right? And we probably agreed it was Owen Jones, who has been personally vile about me, who has the most despicable opinions, is really destroying this country or trying to destroy this country. So there's a whole load of reasons, right, for me to hate or very seriously dislike Owen Jones, and I do. But I was thinking, let's just reverse that and imagine that Owen Jones was on a university campus in the United Kingdom and was politically assassinated in that grotesque fashion. I promise you, I would be utterly traumatized, utterly devastated. Like, you do not want to see what happened to Charlie Kirk happen to your worst enemy. That is the point. It is the end of debate. It is the end of freedom. It is the end of free speech. All of the things that I care about, right? And yet, people who are in my position but on the left are celebrating this. And it happened a lot. And even if they're not celebrating it, they can't express their horror at what happened. So there's such a lack of humanity. So no, I genuinely, there's nothing that the left or the far left have convinced me on. If I really had to think about it, the only area where I have maybe changed my views since leaving GB News is on this idea of politicians being able to present TV shows. And Nigel Farrage was obviously a colleague of mine at GB News for many years, and he appeared on my show every single week. But at that point, he wasn't the leader of a party because he'd stepped back and he had gone full on in his media career. And Richard Tice was the leader of Reform UK. And so I used to have very different interviews with Richard compared to what I had with Nigel Farrage, because Richard was the leader of that party. And very often he wouldn't be happy with me, right? Because I'd challenge him hard if he was on the show, because that was my responsibility as a journalist, because he is the leader of a political party. Nigel, at that point, was a commentator, and he was a commentator who I hugely admired and respected, great track record, but I didn't have to challenge him in the same way that I felt I had to challenge a party leader. And I really have felt quite uncomfortable seeing what's happened at GB News since Nigel became the leader of the party and they've sort of become the propaganda arm of that party. And even though a lot of their viewers support Reform UK, that's not what I think the role of a journalist is or a news organisation is. So that's maybe the only area where I've sort of started to listen to the left a little bit. But remember, I'm not a hypocrite, because they think it's totally fine for David Lammy and Angela Rayner to present radio shows on LBC, right? Whereas I would say, well, you can't have one rule for Nigel Farrage and then a different rule for David Lammy and Angela Rayner. Do you see what I mean? I just don't really think politicians should be hosting TV shows at all. I mean, you don't see it in America. You don't see serving politicians in America hosting a TV show. You see former politicians. That's a different thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. It seems like a conflict of interest. Seems like that way they can use it as a propaganda machine.
But I also hate the off-communists and think that they should be barred. So I want to be clear, like I don't want the off-communists to be given more power. It's more that I feel like a respectful decision probably should have been taken between GB News and Nigel to be like, this sort of doesn't work. Do you see what I mean? But obviously he gets the ratings and they want to keep him. But that's maybe the only area where I've sort of moved my position.
Okay, so in a moment, I'm going to ask you to be positive about the UK and pitch to us why it's still a great place to stay and why we should stay and fight and what you would do to change it. But first, is there a secret you've never shared or a story you've never told?
Well, I mean,
that one.
No, it's that I guess I was just thinking what I probably had just said was one of those things. But no, I mean, I guess, because obviously I've always been so open when I've been on these shows with you. I guess the only thing maybe that I've never really spoken that much about, but certainly was very difficult for me, was discovering post-cancellation, right? How a lot of people who you maybe thought were in your corner were actually only really there because of what they perceived your influence to be in the mainstream media space, right? But then I'm not saying that was a huge surprise, because I've been through a lot of highs and lows in my career. You know, I was at the News of the World when the News of the World was shut in 2011. And so you lose a lot of friends there. So it's not that I was naive to it, but I guess it's still quite a hurtful thing, I guess. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think about things like this a lot as friends come and go. And, you know, I suppose we all have a selfish gene. We need it for survival. And I suppose if you look over 100-year timeline, people are going to come and go.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, you know, are people really loyal to you?
No. And so that was a big learning for me, I guess. But as I say, it's not that I was naive about it, but you're asking for me to...
But when you're hurt, it hurts.
Oh, yeah, and you're asking for me to share something which maybe I don't talk about a lot, because that was a very, very painful period for me, right? A very, very painful period. I'm coming out of the other side now. I love the new business that I've created. I love that I get to do what I do. But it still hurts that there were people who I felt that I was very, very loyal to, who, because you were not connected to a bigger organization, felt like they were all of a sudden happy or prepared to walk away from you. And maybe they did it because, you know, they were worried about self-preservation or whatever it happened to be. But it's a brutal side of the world that we're in. It's one of the reasons I'm happy to be independent. And I do think one of the things that people on the right in the UK are really bad at is just standing up for each other when times are bad.
Yeah, I think we can all do that a little bit more. But I also understand, because, you know, I speak out a lot like you do. I have a lot to lose. And, you know, I'm in the board, and probably 2 to 3 times a year, I'm being challenged because of something I said, which I think is really important to speak out about, because it could hurt my 100 staff. I've got a fiduciary responsibility to the company, and I understand people's fear and reticence.
Especially given the climate that we're in.
Yeah, and it's so easy to just be shut down and cancelled. I mean, are you not scared of being Andrew Tate level cancelled, or even Charlie Kirk level? I mean, you know, your show's blown up. By the way, you know, when I first interviewed you, you were just come out of your worst time. And I couldn't really say it, but I wanted to say I'm so happy for you, Dan, because you're going to blow up. Obviously, you've blown up. You're completely independent. But are you not worried? Because you're quite powerful now.
I mean, look, you'd be silly not to be worried at all. But does it stop me doing or saying anything? No. Because once you've gone through a really brutal cancellation, and my cancellation was brutal, right? There are a whole load of tactics used, and people can go and watch our former interviews to find out, because I went into all of them. But, you know, there were all of them, weren't there? There were police tactics used. There were sexual tactics. You know, they threw everything at me to cancel me, and they succeeded. But there is such a freedom in coming through a brutal cancellation like that. I feel like I'm laser focused now. I know what I'm doing. I know why I'm doing it. I think that really matters too. And when you're part of the corporate media, the regime media, no matter how important your principles are, which obviously to me, they were always incredibly important, and I think any of my viewers or listeners knew that, but you're still having to sort of make your way up that greasy pole. And the two things don't naturally combine. So I just know there's a whole load of people who absolutely tried to destroy me. They wanted me dead. And I came through, and I'll hopefully come through as they keep trying.
But you're not scared?
Not scared. Scared is not the right word, but I think concerned, worried about the sort of really terrifying developments that keep coming. And certainly the assassination of Charlie Kirk, you would be crazy to not look at that and think, oh my God.
Is it worth it?
Not so much is it worth it, because it is worth it, but just think, this is horrible, and this job is not as straightforward as what people might make it out as, because of course Charlie Kirk was a target because he had become so powerful and he was unelected, had never run for office, and yet he was so powerful that they needed to take him out. So it's an inspiration in a way. Of course, it is also really worrying and concerning. But I live my life, and I live my life without fear, and I live my life as if tomorrow could be the end of my life. And certainly coming through cancellation, that was one of the big things that I learned, because you can put all your time and your energy into something, and then it goes.
Yeah, wow. Right, let's finish on the most positive apex of podcasters ever seen. And let's fight for the UK. Tell me a few things that are still great about Great Britain, and what can we do to fix the United Kingdom?
Well, there are so many things that are still great, right? It's so funny though when you said that because I obviously love my food, the first thing that came to mind was just fish and chips, which is so bad. But no, look, we are still an absolutely beautiful country, right? In so many ways. And there are so many parts of this United Kingdom where the world is envious of us. Our beautiful countryside, our incredible heritage buildings. I mean, you go and walk around a city like Edinburgh, and to this day, I pinch myself. It's like you're in a movie set. We are so lucky. And sometimes we do take this for granted. We still have the best culture in the world. We have the best restaurants in the world. What we have to do is make sure that we don't just sign away what does make us British and make us English on the altar of this thing which I believe has failed, called multiculturalism. So I think we've got to lean into the things that make us great, right? So that is our amazing English breakfast. That is our incredible afternoon teas. That is our great passion for football and our support for clubs. So there are so many things. I mean, look, for me, there's still nothing better than going to see a show on the West End of London. I just hope that I'm not mugged outside for my wallet during the interval.
We're trying to keep this positive.
But you know what I mean? That to
Royal
me
family?
is still... And obviously the British royal family is such an important part of who we are. It's a really difficult period for the monarchy. It was always going to be a difficult period after the death of Queen Elizabeth II, but absolutely, I think it makes us different. I think it makes it special. I cover the royal family on my show every single day. I am a monarchist proudly. And I do think it sets us apart actually from a lot of other democracies, because it means there's something that we can come together around, and that's important. That isn't political.
What are you working on? We'll shout out your shows in a moment, but is there anything you've got in the pipeline that you can tell us, or is it just daily news?
So I'm wanting to focus on some bigger projects as we go, but certainly at the moment, I mean, the news agenda is just super intense. Super intense.
It's wild, isn't it? At the moment?
Yeah. And I mean, we do a daily news show 5 days a week at 5 p.m. UK time live
On Outspoken.
on Outspoken on our YouTube channel. But then I also have a separate Royal show, which is again 5 days a week.
Wow.
And that covers just the Royal news, and that broadcasts first on my Substack.
Yeah.
And to be honest, like, oh my God, that is something as I hope Outspoken grows and becomes more successful, I'd love to have a little bit more time. For example, we spoke earlier in the show about Peter Lynch. Like, I would love to be able to go and properly investigate that case, right? At the moment, I'm pretty chained to that daily news agenda, but that's important. And always, that was what I thought Outspoken needed to be, because there are so many people who do, look at what you're doing, great in-depth interviews, right? There are a lot of people who are doing stuff like that. What there wasn't was an independent show that would do the news every single day. So that's my focus, that's my passion, but certainly I hope that I'm going to have a bit more time to do some more in-depth work as we go. But it's a crazy ride.
Yeah. And so it's called Outspoken on YouTube.
Yeah, Dan Wootton Outspoken, and we're on YouTube, but we're also available as a podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And actually the platform that I do push the most is Substack, and my Substack address is www.outspoken.live. So outspoken.live, just because for some of the things that we've spoken about today, there is reason to be nervous. And Substack is a genuinely free speech platform. So on Substack, I'm protected from lawfare. Like, they'll back me when it comes to lawfare. There's no censorship whatsoever. Like, Substack's very, very famous for that.
Yeah.
And people can subscribe completely for free, but if people do want to do that little bit extra, and it's those little micro payments which mean the world and allow me to keep the show going. So like, you can sign up as a monthly member for £5 a month. That's really important. And also, like, on Substack, it's really great. You have this direct connection with people. I can message people in my community direct.
Yeah.
We host live chats. Like, it takes away some of those algorithm issues that we spoke about with YouTube, but also some of the toxicity of a platform like X. Do you see what I mean? It's a community. So that's been a really, it's a real special platform for me, Substack.
Well, Dan, as you know, I'm a big supporter of you, and everyone else should go and support Dan and his great work. Thanks for being on the show.
Rob, I love it. Thank you so much.